Welcome to HWA Plot Channel, where we dive deep into the most mind-bending stories across infinite realities. Imagine for a moment that you are a nobody, a shadow in a world of giants. You spend your days surrounded by the echoes of heroes, but you are nothing more than the man who cleans the dust off their legends.
But what if one afternoon, the dust you brushed away revealed a secret so dangerous it could unmake the very fabric of existence?
What if the book you are holding wasn't just a record of the past, but a blueprint for a terrifying future? Today, we bring you an original epic, The Dimensional Hunter's Secret Notes. This is the story of Cale Arden, an ordinary man who found the key to the multiverse, only to realize that once you open the door, you can never, ever close it again. Deep within the heart of the Royal Arcane Academy, far beneath the soaring spires where mages practice the arts of fire and light, lies the Silent Archive. It is a place of cold stone and eternal shadows, smelling of ancient parchment and the sweet, cloying scent of decay. This was the world of Cale Arden. Cale was a quiet man, a keeper of records who preferred the company of ink and paper to the arrogance of the Academy's scholars. While the world outside buzzed with the politics of kings and the triumphs of knights, Cale lived in the silence of history. One Tuesday, while performing a routine restoration in a vault that hadn't been opened in 3 centuries, Cale noticed something unusual. Behind a shelf of crumbling genealogies, there was a seam in the stone wall. Driven by a curiosity he usually kept buried, he pushed. The stone groaned, sliding back to reveal a hidden alcove. Inside, resting on a pedestal of obsidian, was a weathered leather notebook. It had no title, no author. Its only marking was a single silver eye-shaped emblem embossed on the cover. The moment Cale's fingers touched the leather, a jolt of static electricity raced up his arm, and the temperature in the room dropped to a freezing chill. He opened the book. The pages were blank, yet as he stared, black ink began to bleed through the fibers of the paper like a blooming flower. It didn't just appear, it wrote itself in a frantic, jagged script. If you can read these words, the ink whispered onto the page, the dimensions have already noticed you. Cale froze. He tried to close the book, but his hands wouldn't obey. The ink continued to crawl. The hunter is gone. The gates are thinning. Do not look behind you. Naturally, Cale looked. The air in the archive began to ripple, like heat rising off a summer road. At first, there was nothing. Then he saw them, shimmering distortions in the air, shaped like elongated, multi-limbed creditors. They were invisible to the naked eye, but through the strange resonance of the notebook, KL could see their silhouettes. They were sniffing the air, tracking the scent of the book. These were the things that lived in the cracks of reality. And for the first time in his life, Cale Arden was no longer a spectator. He was prey. He scrambled out of the vault, the notebook clutched to his chest. As the invisible monsters tore through the heavy wooden doors of the archive like they were made of wet paper. The following days were a blur of terror and discovery. Cale realized he couldn't get rid of the book. If he left it, it simply reappeared in his satchel. He was now a tether between this world and something else, following the frantic instructions that continued to appear on the pages. Kael found himself led to the outskirts of the city, to a forgotten ruin beneath the old aqueducts. The notebook demanded he perform a ritual, a series of symbols drawn in his own blood and the dust of a crushed sapphire. "Open the gate," the book commanded. "The guide is waiting." With trembling hands, Cale followed the instructions. The air tore open. It wasn't a hole, but a fracture, glowing with a sickly violet hue. From the rift, a figure tumbled out, crashing onto the stone floor. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and her skin marked with glowing blue runes. This was Lysera Vane. She had been trapped in the Between for decades, a traveler who had lost her way when the notebook's previous owner disappeared. She didn't thank him. Instead, she grabbed him by the collar, her eyes wide with a mixture of recognition and dread. "You found it," she hissed, looking at the notebook. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Master Valor didn't just lose this book, he hid it to stop the search for the prime dimension. And now you've lit a bonfire in the middle of a dark forest. Before Cale could ask what the prime dimension was, the ground shook. A pack of rift beasts, monstrous, chitinous creatures with multiple glowing eyes, began to claw their way through the very fracture KL had just opened. Lysara pulled a jagged blade made of translucent glass from her belt. "Run, Archivist!" If they kill you, the book chooses a new host, and this time it might choose one of them. They barely escaped, sprinting through the sewers as the walls behind them were pulverized by the sheer weight of the dimensional predators. Safe for a fleeting moment in a hidden safe house, Cale realized the notebook was changing. It was no longer just writing warnings. As he and Lysara fought off the stragglers of the rift beasts, the book absorbed the essence of the fallen creatures. New pages sprouted, filled with complex diagrams and instructions for powers Cale never dreamed of. The ink felt alive, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath his fingertips. He began to learn. Under Lysera's cynical guidance, Kale realized he wasn't just a reader, he was becoming a hunter. The notebook taught him rift vision, allowing him to see the weak points in reality. He learned dimensional step, a terrifying technique that allowed him to teleport short distances by momentarily exiting existence and re-entering it. But the most profound power was void thread manipulation, the ability to pull the raw energy of the vacuum and weave it into physical strands that could bind or slice through any material in the physical world. However, each bit of knowledge came with a heavy price. The more pages Kale unlocked, the more scent he gave off. He was no longer just an archivist in a basement. He was a beacon, a signal flare to every cosmic horror and power-hungry entity in the multiverse. The notebook was a map to the ultimate prize, and the entire cosmos was starting to look in Kale's direction. As Kale stood on a rooftop, looking out over a city that had no idea its reality was fraying at the edges, he saw the ink on the next page turn a deep, bruised purple. It formed a single name: the Collector. The journey was only beginning, and the silence of the archive felt like a lifetime ago. Little did Kale know, his discovery had set in motion a war that would span across infinite worlds. And the very book he held was the only thing that could either save reality or be the instrument of its final destruction. Stay tuned to HWAPLOT channel as we continue the journey of Kale Arden in the next chapter of The Dimensional Hunter's Secret Notes. You won't want to miss what happens when the hunter finally meets the one who wants to buy the world. The dust of the Royal Arcane Library had been replaced by the metallic tang of ozone and the shimmering distortion of the void. Kale Arden, once a man who measured his life in ink stains and quiet afternoons, was now a fugitive of reality itself. Beside him stood Lysara Vane, a woman whose very existence was a defiance of physics. Her cloak flickering with the light of stars that had long since burned out. Together, they stepped through the shimmering veil of the notebook's third chapter and into the presence of a man who traded in the impossible. Chapter 4 introduces us to Oren Solace, a figure known across the multiverse as the Merchant of Lost Worlds. He does not reside in a shop or a palace, but in a pocket nexus, a stable bubble of reality floating within the chaotic currents of the between. To enter Oren's domain is to walk through a museum of extinction. Kale watched in awe as he passed shelves lined with bottled atmospheres from planets that had collapsed into black holes. And jars containing the last songs of dying civilizations. Oren himself is an enigma, a man whose skin seems to be made of polished obsidian, reflecting the shifting colors of the nebula outside his windows. He didn't want Kale's gold. He wanted the stories held within the notebook. It is here that the true scale of the threat is revealed. Oren explains that the invisible monsters stalking Kale are merely hounds belonging to a much more dangerous entity, the Eclipse Curator. For centuries, the Curator has been harvesting dimensional cores, the spiritual heartbeats of every reality. When a world dies, its core remains, and the Curator collects them like a gardener gathering seeds. But his goal isn't preservation, it's reconstruction. He seeks to build a perfect singularity, an artificial universe where he dictates the laws of nature. To do this, he needs the notebook. It isn't just a record of dimensions, it is the index of origin. The blueprint that tells the multiverse how to stay separate. Without it, the Curator can force all worlds to collide. Creating a cataclysm that would erase trillions of lives to birth his one perfect world. Oren's warning is cold and absolute. The hunter didn't lose this book, Kale. He hid it, and he hid it from the man who used to call him brother. Guided by the notebook's glowing ink, which now seems to pulse in rhythm with Kale's own heartbeat. The duo travels to the location of the next clue, Chapter 5, the Chronospire. This is a city that exists in the blind spot of time. It is a breathtaking, terrifying landscape of white marble and golden gears, suspended in a perpetual sunset. Here, time does not flow, it stagnates. As Kale and Lysara navigate the silent streets, they see something that chills them to the bone. The city is filled with statues, not made of stone, but of flesh and blood. These are the timeless remnants, previous hunters and dimensional travelers caught in the middle of their final moments. They are perfectly preserved, their faces etched with expressions of horror, bravery, or desperation. Kale finds himself walking through a battlefield frozen in a single millisecond. He sees a warrior mid-swing, a mage mid-incantation, and a child mid-laugh. At the very top of the spire, they find him, Master Valor, the legendary hunter and the notebook's creator. He isn't dead. He is sitting on a throne of glass, his hand outstretched as if reaching for a page that isn't there. He is trapped in a temporal loop, a prison designed by the Curator to keep the master from ever finishing his work. Kale realizes that the notebook is reacting to Valor's proximity. The pages begin to spin rapidly, white light flooding the room. The temporal guardians, colossal entities made of sand and clockwork, awaken to protect the loop. Kale uses void thread manipulation to stitch the guardian's movements to the slow-moving past, allowing him and Lysara to reach the master. Kyle touches Valor's hand, and for a brief, agonizing moment, their minds merge. This leads us into Chapter 6, The Hunter's Final Lesson. This isn't a physical battle, but a mental descent into the archives of Valor's soul. Through the notebook, Kale experiences Valor's memories as if they were his own. He sees the birth of the notebook. It wasn't written with ink, but with linguistic consciousness, a substance harvested from the edge of the first dimension. Valor's voice echoes in Kale's mind, weary and full of regret. He reveals the most terrifying secret of all. The notebook was never meant to be a manual for hunters. It was a seal! Within the very structure of the notebook's logic, Valor had trapped the entropy singularity, the primordial force of decay that eventually consumes every universe. The hunting of dimensional creatures was actually a way to feed the notebook enough energy to keep the seal strong. The monsters you see in the cracks of reality, Valor's memory whispers, are not trying to kill you. They are trying to escape the thing that is coming. They are refugees of a collapsing eternity. Valor reveals that the Eclipse curator, Cassian Drell, was his most gifted student. Cassian didn't start as a villain. He started as a man who couldn't bear to see worlds die. He wanted to use the notebook to save everything by merging it into one. But Valor knew the truth. You cannot force the infinite into a single box without crushing the soul of existence. The lesson is clear. To be a hunter is not to kill, but to maintain the balance. To keep the walls between worlds thick and the secrets of the notebook safe. As the memory fades, Kale wakes up on the floor of the chronospire. The master is gone, his body finally turning to dust now that his message has been delivered. Kale looks down at his hands. The ink from the notebook has begun to seep into his skin, tracing lines up his arms like a map of the stars. He is no longer just an archivist holding a book. He is becoming the book. But the realization comes too late. The air in the spire turns cold, and the golden light of the sunset is swallowed by a sudden, unnatural darkness. The space between the pillars of the city begins to tear like wet paper. A man steps through the rift, dressed in robes that seem to drink the light around him. His eyes are calm, his presence overwhelming. Cassian Drell, the Eclipse curator, has arrived, and he doesn't want to fight Kale. He wants to congratulate him. Because by opening the notebook's 6th chapter, Kale has done what Cassian could never do. He has unlocked the final coordinates to the prime dimension. The middle of our story ends on a knife's edge. Kale stands in the ruins of a city beyond time, facing a man with the power of 1,000 dead suns. Realizing that every step he took to save the world might have been exactly what the enemy needed, The hunter's notes are no longer just a guide. They are a countdown. Stay tuned as we move into the final act of the Dimensional Hunter's Secret Notes, where the war for reality begins. And Cale Arden must decide what he is willing to sacrifice to keep the darkness at bay. The ink is still wet, and the final pages are waiting to be written. The air in the Royal Arcane Library used to smell of old parchment and lavender. Now it smells of ozone and the metallic tang of blood. As we move deeper into the heart of this chronicle, the stakes have shifted from a lone archivist's curiosity to a desperate race for the survival of the multiverse. Cale Arden, once a man who preferred the silence of forgotten stacks, now finds himself standing on the precipice of a literal end of days. The notebook in his hands, once a source of wonder, has become a ticking clock. Following the cryptic trail left by the ink that breathes, Kyle and Lysara Vane arrive at the threshold of Chapter 5, The City Beyond Time. Known in the legends as the Chronospire, this place exists in the in-between, a pocket dimension where seconds stretch into centuries. As they step through a jagged rift, the visual transition is jarring. The ground is made of translucent glass, and the sky is a swirling vortex of golden sand and violet lightning. The spire is a graveyard of moments. Everywhere they look, they see the frozen, thousands of statues captured in mid-motion. But these aren't stone. They are living beings caught in a temporal stasis. Knights with swords half-drawn, sorcerers with spells flickering on their fingertips, and most hauntingly, other hunters. This is where Cale finds him, Master Valor, the legendary author of the Notebook. Valor is suspended in a crystalline pillar, his eyes wide and expressive, filled with a silent scream. He is alive, but his body is locked in a microsecond of a battle that happened 500 years ago. When Cale brings the notebook near Violar's prison, the journal reacts violently. The leather cover pulses like a heartbeat. In this proximity, Chapter 6 begins to write itself, not in words, but in a flood of shadow memories that pour directly into Cale's mind. This is the hunter's final lesson. Cale experiences Valor's life in a flash. He realizes the notebook was never a diary. It was a sentient anchor, a living consciousness forged from the essence of a dying dimension. Valor hadn't been hunting monsters for sport. He was calling corrupted realities to prevent a total systemic collapse. The most terrifying revelation? The notebook wasn't designed to empower the hunter. It was designed to act as a seal for a primordial force of entropy known as the Great Void. By opening the notebook and using its powers, Cale hasn't just been learning. He has been finning the seal. Before Kale can process the weight of this betrayal by destiny, the temporal guardians of the spire, colossal, clockwork entities made of gears and celestial fire, awaken. The battle is a blur of shifting gravity and distorted time. Kale is forced to use the void thread manipulation he mastered earlier, weaving the very fabric of the spire to trip the guardians. Weaving the very fabric of the spire to trip the guardians. But as they prepare to free Valor, the atmosphere curdles. The golden light of the spire turns a sickly, bruised black. This brings us to the introduction of our primary antagonist in Chapter 7, the Eclipse Curator. Cassian Drell doesn't arrive with a roar. He arrives with a whisper. He walks through the temporal distortions as if they were nothing more than a summer breeze. Cassian was Valor's most brilliant student, the man who was supposed to inherit the notebook before he turned to a darker philosophy. He believes that the existence of multiple dimensions is a flaw, a chaotic scattering of energy that leads only to suffering and eventual decay. His goal is the great synthesis, merging every world, every timeline, and every soul into a single, static, perfect reality under his control. The confrontation is devastating. Kale, still an amateur compared to a century-old master of the arts, tries to use the Rift Vision to predict Cassian's movements. But the curator is always 3 steps ahead. Cassian doesn't want to kill Kale, not yet. He needs the notebook. In a moment of sheer magical dominance, Cassian reaches into the very concept of the journal and tears it. The sound is like a universe screaming. Cassian rips away more than half the pages, including the ones containing the high-level sealing rituals and the maps to the prime dimension. Kale is left clutching a tattered remnant of leather and a few scattered leaves of ink. With half the key in his possession, Cassian vanishes, leaving the Chronospire to collapse. Cal and Lysera barely escape the imploding dimension, falling back into the material world only to find it unrecognizable. The war across infinite worlds has begun. Chapter 8 depicts a reality in total fracture. Because the notebook's seal has been weakened and Cassian is actively merging cores from different realms? The sky over Kale's home city is now a patchwork of different heavens. In one corner, there are the floating islands of the ether realm. In another, the mechanical suns of the clockwork wastes. Monsters and civilians from 1,000 different worlds are suddenly thrust together in a chaotic struggle for space. Kale, now a fugitive and a failing guardian, realizes he cannot win this alone. This is the part of the journey where the archivist must become a general. He uses the remaining fragments of his notebook to track down those who have been discarded by Cassian's grand design. He recruits the sky pirates of the Cinnabar Sea, whose ships can sail on the winds of mana. he gained the allegiance of the crystal dragons, ancient beings who store the history of worlds in their scales. He finds the shadow monks who have lived in the cracks of reality for generations, and the remaining exiled hunters who survived Cassian's initial purge. The scale of the narrative shifts here from a personal mystery to an epic war. We see battles fought on the backs of leviathans in the clouds and tactical strikes within the gears of reality itself. Kale is no longer just reading the notes. He is writing his own. He discovers that the living ink responds to his will. Even with half the pages gone, his desperation allows him to create new techniques, echo-stepping through multiple versions of himself to fight entire platoons of Cassian's void-stained soldiers. But as the war rages, Kale notices a terrifying trend. Every time he uses the power of the notebook to save a world, the cracks in reality grow wider. He realizes that Cassian's plan is working not because the curator is winning every battle, but because the very act of fighting, the very use of dimensional energy, is accelerating the collapse. The middle of our story ends on a note of grim realization. Kale stands atop the ruins of the Royal Arcane Library, looking out at a horizon where 3 different suns are setting simultaneously. He holds the fragmented notebook, the ink on its pages glowing with an unstable, white-hot intensity. He has the army. He has the will. But he finally understands the secret Master Valor tried to hide in the shadow memories. The only way to truly save the dimensions isn't to win the war, but to end the Age of the Hunters entirely. To defeat the Eclipse Curator, Kale won't just have to sacrifice his life, he will have to sacrifice the very thing that made him special. The stage is set for the final descent. The ink is bleeding through the paper, and the final hidden page is beginning to shimmer into existence. It is a page that demands a price Kale Arden never expected to pay. As we move toward the conclusion, remember, in a world of infinite realities, the only thing that truly matters is the one thing you are willing to lose forever. The transition from an archivist of dusty records to a guardian of the multiverse is not a leap, but a slow, agonizing crawl through the unknown. Kale Arden, once content with the smell of old parchment and the silence of the Royal Arcane Library, now finds himself breathing the ozone-thick air of the void between. The notebook in his hands pulses with a heartbeat that matches his own, its leather cover warm, almost feverish. As the ink continues to bleed and shimmer, leading us into the heart of this odyssey, Kale and Lysera Vane arrive at the Emporium of the Unmade. This is where we meet our next pivotal figure, Orin Solis. Oren is not merely a merchant, he is a scavenger of extinction. His shop exists within the hollowed-out ribcage of a celestial beast. Shelves are lined with jars containing the last breaths of dying civilizations and shards of stars that never got to shine. Oren himself is a man of shifting features, his eyes like spinning nebula, reflecting the very things he trades. When Kale reveals the eye-shaped emblem of the notebook, the merchant's eccentric charm vanishes instantly, replaced by a cold, geometric dread. Oren reveals the terrifying scope of the conflict Kale has stumbled into. The notebook isn't just a record of what exists. It is a blueprint of what remains after a world is devoured. He speaks of the Eclipse Curator, a shadow figure. The curator views the multiverse as a junkyard to be harvested, seeking the great synthesis, crushing every dimension into a single, sterile universe. To complete this monstrous tapestry, the curator needs the binding agent found only in the notebook's living ink. "You aren't carrying a book, boy," Oren warns, his voice sounding like grinding gears. "You are carrying the glue that holds God together." And the curator is coming to peel it off. Determined to find a way to stop the curator, the notebook guides Kale and Lasara toward the Chronospire, a legendary city frozen outside the traditional flow of time. The journey is an assault on the senses. To reach it, Kale must use his newly mastered void thread manipulation. He learns to see the invisible tethers that connect cause to effect, plucking them like harp strings to bridge the gaps between crumbling realities. When they finally breach the gates of the Chronospire, the silence is deafening. The city is a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, bathed in a permanent twilight. But the horror lies in its inhabitants. Thousands of figures are scattered across the plazas and balconies, warriors, scholars, and children, all frozen in a single moment of absolute terror. They are not statues. They are living beings trapped in a microsecond of a battle that happened centuries ago. Among these frozen phantoms, at the highest balcony of the spire, stands a figure Kale recognizes from the notebook's early sketches. Master Valor, the legendary dimensional hunter and the notebook's original creator. Valor is caught mid-swing, his ethereal blade inches away from a shadow that has no form. As Kale touches the cover of the notebook to Valor's frozen hand, the living ink reacts violently. The pages begin to flip at impossible speeds, and Kale is sucked into a memory rift, a psychic projection of Valor's final thoughts. In this vision, the truth is laid bare. Valor didn't write the notebook to hunt monsters. He created it as a conscious seal. The multiverse is naturally prone to decay and dimensional bleed. The notebook acts as a cosmic filter, absorbing the chaotic energy. It was designed to be a burden, a heavy weight carried by one person so that everyone else could live in a world that made sense. Valor's memory speaks directly to Kale's mind. The hunter is not a predator, Kale. The hunter is a shepherd of the end. We do not kill to destroy. We kill to preserve the boundary. But the revelation comes with a darker price. Valor reveals the identity of the person who betrayed him, the very person who froze the chronospire in time to keep Valor from finishing the seal. It was his most gifted apprentice, Cassian Drell. Cassian didn't want to be a shepherd. He wanted to be the owner of the flock. He believed that by merging all dimensions, he would end all conflict, all hunger, and all death, at the cost of all freedom and individuality. The memory fractures as a shadow falls over the spire in the present day. The sky above the timeless city begins to crack like glass. The eclipse curator has arrived. He does not descend with fire or thunder, but with an agonizing, silent pressure. Cassian Drell appears as a man draped in robes made of negative matter, his face hidden behind a mask that reflects Kale's own terrified expression. He doesn't see Kale as an enemy, but as a temporary, misguided librarian holding onto a library he doesn't understand. The notebook is a cage, Kale Arden, Cassian's voice echoes, vibrating through Kale's very bones. You think you are protecting reality, but you are merely prolonging its slow, agonizing decay. Join me. Let us fold these broken pages into a single perfect story that never has to end. Kale, bolstered by the techniques he has absorbed, the rift vision that allows him to see Cassian's multiple potential positions, and the dimensional step that lets him flicker through the air, engages in a desperate, high-speed skirmish. The battle is a kaleidoscopic blur of shifting landscapes. One moment, they are clashing atop the spire. The next, they are falling through a dimension made of liquid light. However, Kale is still a novice compared to a man who has lived for centuries across 1,000 worlds. With a flick of his wrist, Cassian manipulates the very fabric of the spire, pinning Lysera against a wall of solidified time and forcing Kale to choose the notebook or his friend. In that moment of hesitation, Cassian strikes. He doesn't kill Kale. Instead, he reaches into the notebook itself. With a sound like tearing silk, Cassian rips away exactly half of the pages, the chapters containing the primordial anchors, the spells required to keep the dimensions separate. You keep the memories, Archivist, Cassian sneers, his form beginning to dissipate into a vortex of dark energy. I will take the foundations. The great synthesis begins now. As Cassian vanishes, the chronospire begins to groan. The temporal guardians, colossal entities made of gears and ancient law, begin to awaken, sensing that the seal has been compromised. They don't distinguish between Kale and Cassian. They only see intruders who have broken the stillness of the spire. Kale stands in the ruins of the city, his hands trembling as he holds the mangled remains of the notebook. He has lost half of his power. His mentor's legacy is in the hands of a madman, and the very walls of reality are starting to thin. But as he looks at the remaining pages, he sees the ink beginning to rewrite itself once more. The notebook is not giving up. It is showing him a map, not of the world he knows, but of the allies he must find. The stage is no longer just a library or a single city. The war has expanded. To stop the Eclipse Curator, Cal must now travel to the fringes of the multiverse, gathering the outcasts, the exiles, and the survivors of the worlds Cassian has already destroyed. The archivist is gone, the hunter is born, and though his notebook is broken, the story it tells is far from over. The ink is now flowing faster than ever, and it is no longer black. It is the color of a coming storm. Chapter 8: War Across Infinite Worlds. The storm that began as a whisper in the archives has now become a tempest that spans across the fabric of existence. Cassian Drell, the Eclipse Curator, has begun the Great Merging. Using the stolen pages of Kale's notebook, he has initiated a sequence that pulls the cores of different dimensions toward a single, unstable center. To Cassian, this is the birth of a perfect, unified world. To the rest of the multiverse, it is a slow, agonizing death. But Kale Arden is no longer the timid archivist who once trembled at the sight of a rift beast. He has become a beacon for those who refuse to be erased. From the floating docks of the Etheria Reach, Cal rallies the Sky Pirates, men and women who have spent their lives navigating the currents between worlds. Their ships, reinforced with dimensional plating, become the vanguard of a multiversal fleet. From the subterranean caverns of Xylos, the crystal dragons emerge, their scales reflecting the light of 1,000 different suns, providing the raw elemental power needed to stabilize the collapsing borders. In the shattered remains of the rune cities, Kale finds the rune engineers, master architects who can build bridges out of pure logic. Alongside them are the Shadow Monks, silent guardians who move through the spaces between spaces, acting as the invisible blade against Cassian's army of Voidsent. This is the Convergence War. It is a battle fought not just on land, but across the very concept of distance and time. Kale stands at the helm of the Alliance, using his remaining fragments of the notebook to predict Cassian's movements. Even with only half the book, Kel's connection to the living ink has deepened. He no longer needs to read the spells. He feels them. He manipulates the void threads to pull his allies out of danger and opens temporary gates to drop Legion battalions into the vacuum of space. Yet, for every victory Kael achieves, Cassian grows stronger. The more dimensions the curator merges, the more godlike his power becomes. The sky of every world is now a mosaic of other worlds, a terrifying kaleidoscope of colliding realities. The end is near, and Kael knows that traditional warfare will not win this. He needs the final secret. Chapter 9: The Last Secret Page. As the war reaches its fever pitch, Kael retreats into the deepest chamber of the Krona Spire, the only place where time remains still enough for him to think. He looks at his notebook, scarred, half empty, and glowing with a frantic, pulsating light. He realizes that the book has been guiding him all along, not to power, but to a choice. He concentrates every ounce of his rift vision, pushing past the ink and the paper, looking into the very soul of the artifact. Suddenly, the notebook begins to vibrate. The remaining blank pages start to glow with a blinding golden luminescence. A new page writes itself, the final page. But there are no incantations here, no maps to hidden relics, no forbidden techniques. There is only a single devastating truth written in a script that resonates with Kael's own heartbeat. The Guardian is not the one who holds the power, but the one who is willing to let it go. The notebook reveals its origin. It was never meant to be a weapon or a library. It was a failsafe created by the universe itself. The dimensional consciousness knew that eventually someone like Cassian would try to hoard the secrets of existence. The notebook was designed to choose a person of humble spirit, an archivist, someone who values stories over power, to act as the final lock. Kael realizes that he is the next guardian, but his duty is not to rule the dimensions. His duty is to close them off from one another once more, to restore the walls that Cassian has torn down. But there is a price. To mend the multiverse, the notebook and everything it has created, including Kael's newfound powers and his memories of the other worlds, must be erased. If he destroys the book, he saves the universe, but he loses the magic that has come to define him. He would return to being an ordinary man in a world that has forgotten the wonders he has seen. Chapter 10: Beyond Every Horizon. The final confrontation takes place at the nexus of all realities, a shimmering platform of pure energy where Cassian Drell stands, ready to strike the final blow that will fuse all existence into his image. You are a fool, Kale, Cassian sneers, his form flickering with the power of 100 suns. With that book, we could have been gods. We could have written a reality without pain, without loss, without limits. Kale looks at the man who was once the greatest hunter, seeing only a shadow consumed by his own ambition. A world without limits is a world without meaning, Cassian. A story only matters because it has an end. With a steady hand, Kale ignores the spells Cassian flings at it. He channels the entirety of his void thread manipulation, not to attack, but to bind himself to the notebook one last time. He speaks the final command, a word that hasn't been uttered since the dawn of time. Dissolve! The notebook erupts into a pillar of white light. The pages fly out, turning into butterflies of pure energy that flutter toward the cracks in reality. Everywhere a butterfly touches, the dimensional rift heals. The sky pirates find themselves back in their own clouds. The crystal dragons return to their caves, and the armies of the void vanish into nothingness. Cassian screams as the stolen pages in his hand turn to ash. His power, built on the stolen foundations of other worlds, collapses. He is pulled back into the prime dimension, stripped of his magic, a mere mortal once more, destined to be forgotten by the very history he tried to rewrite. Kale feels the living ink leaving his veins. The rift vision fades. The weight of the multiverse lifts from his shoulders, leaving a profound, hollow silence. Years pass. The Royal Arcane Library has been rebuilt. Kale Arden sits at his desk, surrounded by the smell of old parchment and dust. He is a quiet man, known for his efficiency and his strange habit of staring out the window at the sunset, as if looking for something that isn't there. He remembers the name Lysara and Valor, but they feel like characters from a dream he had a long time ago. One evening, a young girl, an apprentice from the lower archives, walks up to his desk. She looks excited, holding a tattered, leather-bound journal she found beneath the ruins of a tower that shouldn't have been there. "Master Kale," she whispers, "I found this. It was under a stone marked with an eye, but I can't read it. The pages are blank." Kale takes the journal. His hands tremble slightly. As his fingers touch the weathered leather, a single drop of ink appears on the first page. It spreads, forming elegant handwritten letters that seem to pulse with a faint, familiar glow. Kale smiles, a spark of recognition lighting up his eyes. He looks at the girl and whispers, "Sit down. This is a story you need to hear." On the first page, the ink settles into words that will begin a new era. Volume 2 awaits the next hunter. The ink may fade, but the legends never truly die. Kale's journey as the dimensional hunter has reached its end, but as we've seen, every ending is just a hidden beginning. The multiverse is vast, filled with secrets yet to be uncovered and dimensions yet to be explored. If you enjoyed this 10-chapter epic of The Dimensional Hunter's Secret Notes, make sure to show your support. Your journey with us doesn't have to end here. Don't forget to like this video if you loved the story, and most importantly, subscribe to HWA Plot Channel. By joining our community, you'll be the first to witness new worlds, original characters, and mind-bending plots that you won't find anywhere else. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a single chapter of our upcoming adventures. What secret would you write in the notebook if you found it? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the world of stories, the next page is always yours to turn. Only here on HWA Plot Channel. See you in the next dimension.